So, it all started with what she called the prank of the year. Halloween, right? I should have known Emma couldn't resist showing off, being the center of attention like always. But this year she took it too far, way too far. It was one of those rowdy Halloween parties we throw every year. The kind where the house fills up with our friends, her friends, and a bunch of people we don't even know half the time. Emma was in her element, mingling, laughing too loud, making sure she was at the heart of every joke. I was cool with it, sipping my drink and nodding along, just trying to make it through the night. I'd seen her in this mood before, like the party existed just to feed her ego. Then she started teasing about some wild surprise she had planned for later. Everyone was talking, whispering like they couldn't wait to see what she'd pull off. I figured it was another one of her dumb pranks. Emma loved pranks, always pushing the line just enough to get a reaction but never really crossing it. Until this time. Around midnight, she called me over in front of everyone. And I already didn't like the look in her eyes. Too playful, too sure of herself. But whatever, right? It's Halloween and she was just hyping up the moment. She pulled out a blindfold, grinning like she was about to change my life, and all our guests were chanting for me to play along. A part of me hesitated. I'm not big on surprises, especially not when they're from Emma in this mood. But, with half the party watching and egging me on, I figured what the hell. So there I am, standing in the middle of our living room, blindfolded with Emma circling me like a cat that's got the mouse cornered. I could hear her whisper something to one of our friends. More laughter, the music lowering to almost nothing. My instincts were screaming at me that something was wrong. My heart was pounding, but I kept it together. I had no idea what she was about to do. And then, just as I felt her move behind me, I heard another voice. A man's voice. Too close. His breath right next to my ear. My pulse jumped. I'm thinking this has gone too far already. What kind of prank was this? The room went silent for a second before a soft chuckle broke through the tension. And suddenly, hands that weren't hers were on my shoulders. That's when I yanked off the blindfold, heart racing, expecting to see someone joking around. But when I turned, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a prank. Not in the way I'd thought. Standing in front of me, smirking like he'd just won a prize, was Mike, our neighbor. He had his arm around Emma like he owned the place, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The room erupted in awkward laughter, but my ears were ringing, blocking it out. I locked eyes with Emma, but she didn't even flinch, didn't look sorry. "Surprise," she said, a mocking edge to her voice, like I should be laughing along with them. But all I could see was the smug look on Mike's face and the way her body leaned into his. Too familiar, too comfortable. This wasn't just a joke. This was something much worse. For a moment I didn't move. My brain was still processing what the hell was happening. I stood there, frozen, watching the woman I've been calling my wife practically draped over Mike like it was the most natural thing in the world. The room around me buzzed with nervous laughter, but I barely heard any of it. "Emma, what the hell is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked in the middle. I could feel my face getting hot, that cold rush of anger flooding in as my hands clenched into fists. I thought this was supposed to be a prank, some twisted Halloween joke, but no one was laughing anymore. Not really. She didn't even pull away from him. Instead, she tilted her head to the side, giving me that look she does when she thinks I'm being overly serious, like I'm the one making things awkward. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's just Mike. Relax. Relax." Was she insane? Just Mike? Why the hell is just Mike touching you like that? My voice came out louder than I intended, and I could feel everyone's eyes on us now. The music had stopped entirely, and the air felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Mike didn't say a word. Of course he didn't. He just stood there, grinning like he was in on some private joke. One I was clearly left out of. I wanted to hit him right there, just knock that smug look off his face. But I needed to hear her say it. I needed her to admit it, even though everything in me was already screaming the truth. Emma just shrugged, like it was no big deal. "We've been hanging out. You know how close Mike and I are." "Hanging out," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You think this looks like hanging out?" She finally took a step away from him, but not because she felt guilty. It was like she was annoyed that I was making a scene, that I wasn't playing along with whatever twisted game this was. "Look, it's harmless," she said, brushing it off like we were talking about spilling a drink. "Not this. It's Halloween. Everyone's having fun. Why do you have to make it weird?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why do I have to make it weird? My mind was racing, trying to piece together how we got to this point. Was this some sick fantasy of hers? Had she been planning this the whole time? Or had I just been blind to everything? The worst part was, I didn't even know how long this had been going on. How many times had Mike been at our house? Right under my nose. And what the hell did hanging out mean? Anyway, I took a step closer, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "How long, Emma? How long has this been going on?" For a second, just a flicker of a moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. Replaced by that cold indifference that was killing me more than any confession could. She crossed her arms over her chest, defensive now. "Why does it matter? It's not like it's a big deal." Not a big deal. I felt like my head was about to explode. Was she seriously downplaying this? My entire life was being ripped apart right in front of me, and she was acting like it was nothing. Like I was the one overreacting. I glanced around at our friends, the ones who were still standing there, pretending not to watch, but I knew they were. How long had they known? Did they know at all? Were they all just waiting for this moment, for the big prank to come to a head? I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the house, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. But nothing could cool the fire that was burning inside me. As I walked down the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Emma. "You're overreacting. It's not what you think." But I didn't need to think anymore. I'd seen enough. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of her words, the nerve it took for her to send that. Not what I think. What was she trying to sell me now? Every step I took away from that house, from her and him, felt like I was pulling away from the life I thought I knew. But at the same time, it felt like I was waking up from a dream I'd been stupid enough to believe in for too long. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and kept walking, trying to piece everything together. My mind was racing, but memories started surfacing that I'd been too blind, too trusting to see before. Little things, like the way she'd started spending more time at Mike's place recently, always with some excuse that didn't sit right with me. "Oh, Mike's got a new setup for movie nights." Or, "I'm helping Mike with his dog. He's been too busy to handle it himself." And I'd believed her because, of course, why wouldn't I? Mike had been our neighbor for years. We'd grilled burgers with him, shared beers, laughed over stupid jokes at the bar. It never crossed my mind that there might be more going on behind the scenes. But now, all those moments felt like puzzle pieces falling into place. The late-night texts she'd gotten from him, the random phone calls, the inside jokes that didn't include me. Every time I'd questioned it, she'd brushed me off. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking it. I wanted to trust her, to trust them both. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, insecure husband who reads into things too much. Except now it was all there, staring me in the face. I kept walking until I reached a small park a few blocks away. The swings creaked in the wind, the streetlights casting long shadows across the empty playground. I sat on one of the benches, head in my hands, trying to calm the storm in my chest. How had I been so blind? How had I missed all the signs? And more importantly, how had she managed to convince me it was all nothing? I replayed the night in my head, over and over. Her leaning into Mike like it was normal. His hand casually resting on her hip like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The way she didn't flinch, didn't try to hide it. That was the part that stung the most. There was no shame in her, no guilt. Just indifference. As if I was some annoyance, getting in the way of her fun. Like I was the one being unreasonable for even questioning what was going on. My phone buzzed again. Another message. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen before I finally swiped to read it. "Can we talk about this when you calm down? You're blowing it out of proportion." Blowing it out of proportion? I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was sitting here, barely able to hold myself together, while she was probably still at the party, playing it off like I was just having some emotional breakdown over nothing. As if catching her with Mike wasn't enough proof that something was very, very wrong. I wanted to scream, to break something. But instead, I typed back, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Blowing it out of proportion? I caught you with him, Emma. You didn't even try to hide it. There was a pause before her next message came through. This time, it felt like she was trying harder. Like she knew I wasn't going to just roll over and accept her excuses. Look, I know how it must have looked. But nothing's going on with me and Mike. It was just a joke. A dumb Halloween prank. Okay? You've been stressed out lately, and I thought it'd be funny to mess with you a little. I didn't mean for it to go this far. A joke. She was still pushing that angle. Trying to gaslight me into thinking I'd imagined the whole thing. That it was all some harmless prank I'd overreacted to. But I wasn't buying it anymore. Couldn't. There was no way I was going to let her twist this into something it wasn't. I stood up from the bench, pacing back and forth, my thoughts spiraling. Was this really who she was? Someone who would humiliate me in front of our friends and then lie straight to my face about it afterward? I'd spent years with this woman, thinking we were building a life together, trusting her more than anyone in the world. And now it was like the ground beneath my feet had split open, revealing something I didn't want to see. But I couldn't look away anymore. This wasn't just a prank. It was a betrayal, one she wasn't even sorry for. I fired off one last text before shoving the phone back in my pocket, this time with finality. Come clean, Emma. I'm not AF **NG idiot. The truth was out there now, hanging in the air between us. I knew it. She knew it. And there was no going back. The phone didn't buzz again for a while, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. The air felt thick around me, like I was waiting for a bomb to drop, knowing it was coming but not knowing when. I sat back down on the bench, staring at the empty street, wondering how the hell I was supposed to deal with this. My mind kept spinning in circles. Was it really just a prank? No. I'd seen the way Mike looked at her, the casual way he touched her like it was nothing new. That kind of comfort didn't come from a one-off joke. That came from something deeper, something that had been building for God knows how long. Just as I was getting ready to stand up and walk home, my phone lit up again. Another message from her. Fine. If you want to talk about it, come back. But don't act like I'm the only one to blame here. You've been distant for months. You barely notice me anymore, and yeah, maybe I got too close to Mike. But it's because you checked out. Don't act like I'm crazy for wanting attention. There it was. The shift. The moment she decided to flip this whole mess back onto me. The classic move. I could practically hear her voice, that manipulative tone she used when she wanted to twist the narrative to make herself look like the victim. Suddenly, it wasn't about her betrayal. It was about me being distant. About me not giving her the attention she needed. I felt my blood boil, my fingers clenching around the phone. How dare she? How dare she try to pin this on me? I wasn't the one sneaking around with the neighbor. I wasn't the one crossing boundaries and disrespecting our marriage. But now she was trying to act like this was my fault. As if I had somehow driven her into Mike's arms. I didn't even know how to respond. There was too much swirling in my head. Too much anger. Too much hurt. But before I could figure out what to say, my phone started ringing. It was Emma. I hesitated for a second, then swiped to answer. Are you done throwing a tantrum yet? She said, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence on the other end. No apology. No guilt. Just her, irritated that I wasn't falling in line. A tantrum? You're calling this a tantrum? I shot back, my voice strained. I caught you, Emma. You were all over Mike in front of everyone. And now you're trying to make this my fault? Like I haven't been doing everything I can to keep this marriage together, while you're out there making me look like an idiot. She sighed, loud and exaggerated. I'm not making you look like an idiot. You're doing that on your own by blowing this out of proportion. Nothing happened, okay? Mike and I have just been spending time together because, honestly, you've been checked out. I needed someone to talk to, and you weren't there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you think getting close to him like that is the answer? Humiliating me in front of everyone. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing on the other end, probably figuring out her next move. But when she finally spoke, her tone was cold, detached. You've been ignoring me for months, and yeah, I got close to Mike. He pays attention. He actually cares. Maybe if you did the same, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. She was really doing it. She was really shifting all the blame onto me, as if her getting cozy with Mike was somehow a reasonable response to me not paying attention. That's your excuse? I said, my voice low, dangerous. That I haven't been paying enough attention to you? So you start spending all your time with him? Touching him like that? Flirting with him in front of me? And you expect me to just, what? Accept that? I'm not saying I'm perfect, she snapped. But maybe if you weren't so wrapped up in your own world, you'd have noticed how unhappy I've been. I was speechless. Unhappy? She'd never said a word about being unhappy. We had our arguments, sure, but nothing that even hinted at her feeling this way. And even if she was, why the hell was her first solution to run to Mike instead of talking to me? But then, in the back of my mind, I realized maybe this wasn't new. Maybe she'd been unhappy for a while, and this whole thing with Mike was just the part of the iceberg I could finally see. How long had this been going on behind my back? How many times had she lied, smiled in my face while slipping away to him? Did anything happen between you two? I asked, my voice shaky, barely holding it together. And I swear to God, Emma, if you lie to me. There was a long pause. Too long. No, she finally said. But there was something off in her voice. Nothing happened. But I didn't believe her. Couldn't. There was no way she could stand there, that comfortable with him, with nothing more behind it. Do you really expect me to believe that? I said, my throat tightening. After what I saw, after the way you were with him tonight. Believe what you want, she replied, her voice cold again. But I'm not going to sit here and grovel just because you can't handle a little flirting. Maybe if you actually paid attention to me, we wouldn't be here. And there it was. The mask finally slipped, and I saw her for who she really was. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about us. It was about her, and her selfish need to feel wanted, to feel like the center of someone's world. She didn't care about what this did to me, how it shattered everything I thought we had. She only cared about herself. And I knew right then, this wasn't going to end the way she thought. Her words hung in the air like poison, twisting deeper into my chest with every breath. I was done. Done trying to understand. Done trying to see things from her warped perspective. My mind was screaming with everything she'd said, her voice still echoing like a bad dream. Blaming me. Flirting? She actually had the nerve to call it that. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. The thing that gutted me the most wasn't even the fact that she was with Mike. It was the way she talked to me, like I was an inconvenience, like my feelings didn't matter at all. Her self-righteousness, the way she brushed off what she did, it told me everything I needed to know. Emma, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though every part of me wanted to yell. If you really think this is about a little flirting, then you don't get it. This isn't just some stupid misunderstanding. You humiliated me tonight, in front of everyone, and you didn't even care. She laughed, actually laughed, as if what I was saying was ridiculous. Oh my God. You're acting like I committed some crime. I told you it was harmless. Stop being so dramatic. That laugh, that cold, dismissive sound, hit me harder than any of her words had. My pulse pounded in my ears, my fists clenching at my sides. I'd never felt this angry, not once in my life. I could deal with her excuses, even the lies. But the way she laughed in the face of my pain, that was the final straw. I want you to answer me, Emma, I said, my voice low and steady, but I could feel the rage bubbling just under the surface. How long has this been going on with Mike? I mean the truth, not the version you're trying to feed me. There was silence on the other end of the line. No more excuses, no more playing it off. She knew this time was different. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost its edge, but there was no remorse in it either, just exhaustion, like she was tired of pretending. Fine, she muttered. You want the truth? I don't know when it started. It just happened. Mike and I, we clicked. He listens to me, pays attention to me. And yeah, maybe it went too far, but honestly, I'm not going to apologize for needing someone who actually sees me. My chest tightened, the words hitting me like a sledgehammer. She had just admitted it. She wasn't even pretending anymore. All this time, while I was trying to keep us afloat, to keep her happy, she was running off to Mike for attention. And now she was acting like I was supposed to accept it, like I had no right to feel betrayed. "So you've been cheating on me?" I said quietly, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Saying it out loud made it real. It wasn't just a suspicion or a fear anymore. It was the truth. Emma didn't deny it. She didn't even try. Instead, she sighed, like she was exhausted by the whole thing. "I wouldn't call it that." "Really?" I spat back, my anger finally breaking through. "What would you call it, then? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. You've been seeing him behind my back, lying to me, disrespecting me in front of everyone. So tell me, what the hell else is it if not cheating?" "It's not that simple," she said, her voice defensive again. "It's not like I planned it, okay? It just happened. And besides, nothing physical ever happened. We never, So if you're asking me if I cheated, then no, I didn't." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She really thought she could draw some arbitrary line in the sand and make everything okay? That just because they hadn't crossed that line, I was supposed to let it slide? "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. "You think because you didn't cross some technical line that makes it better? You think that changes the fact that you've betrayed me? That you've been sneaking around with him?" I could hear her pacing on the other end of the line, her breath quickening. She wasn't used to me pushing back like this. In the past, I'd always backed down, always tried to smooth things over. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't letting her manipulate me into thinking this was okay. "Look, I'm sorry if you feel like I crossed a line," she said, her tone half-hearted. "But I don't think it's fair to call this cheating. You've been distant for months, and I don't want to hear another word about me being distant." I cut her off, my voice like ice. "This isn't about me, Emma. This is about you. You did this. You made this mess. And now you're trying to pin it on me because you can't face the fact that you screwed up." She didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear her breathing, hear the frustration in the silence between us. I wondered if she was finally realizing that she couldn't spin this anymore, that she couldn't talk her way out of it like she always did. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, bitter. "So what now, huh? Are you just going to hold this over my head forever? Or are we actually going to talk like adults?" It was almost laughable. She was still trying to turn the tables, still acting like this was some minor issue we could just talk through. "No, Emma," I said, my voice calm, resolute. "We're not talking through this. There's nothing to talk about anymore." The weight of my words settled in, and for the first time all night, I felt a strange sense of clarity, like I'd been wandering in a fog for months. And now, everything was finally clear. This wasn't something we could fix. I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her lies, her excuses, her selfishness anymore. "This is over," I said firmly. "I'm done." And with that, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. When I hung up, the silence felt strange. Not the kind of quiet that gives you peace, but the kind that leaves your heart pounding in your ears, filling the space where 1,000 words should have been. My hand trembled as I put the phone down on the bench next to me. I didn't know if it was the cold night air or the adrenaline crashing out of my system, but I suddenly felt empty. It was over. I said it. And the thing that shook me most wasn't the finality of it, but how certain I was. This wasn't something I could fix. Emma and I weren't going to sit down, hash it out, and piece ourselves back together. She'd shattered something, and no amount of apologies or explanations could put it back in place. The weight of that realization crushed me for a moment, making it hard to breathe. The life I'd built with her, the future I thought we had, it all crumbled in the span of a single conversation. I sat there, staring out at the empty park, trying to wrap my head around what I was supposed to do next. My phone buzzed again, Emma, no doubt, but I didn't even look at it. Couldn't. There was nothing more to say. Instead, I started thinking about the last few months, the little signs that I'd ignored, or maybe just hadn't wanted to see. The late nights when she'd claimed to be with her friends, the times she was glued to her phone, smiling at some text she never showed me, the excuses she gave when she came home late, the vague answers when I asked where she'd been. It all seemed so obvious now. I'd been the fool, thinking she was just going through a phase, that maybe work was stressing her out, or that she just needed some space. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, believing that she'd come around, that we'd figure things out together. But she wasn't trying to figure anything out. She was looking for an escape, and she found it in Mike. The worst part? She didn't even care enough to hide it. She was bold, reckless, parading it in front of our friends like it didn't matter. The memory of her leaning into him, laughing, his arm around her, it made my stomach churn. I'd been standing right there, blindfolded and oblivious, while the rest of the room probably knew what was going on long before I did. I wondered how many of them had seen it, how many knew about Mike and Emma. Were they all laughing at me behind my back? The humiliation burned in my chest, but I pushed it down. I couldn't deal with that on top of everything else. I knew I couldn't stay in that park forever, no matter how much I wanted to just sit there, lost in the quiet. I had to go back to the house eventually. I had to face her. But the thought of walking back into that place, knowing she was still there, knowing he might still be there, it made me sick. But I couldn't hide from this. I had to confront it head-on. I stood up, the cold air biting at my skin, and started walking back. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was dragging my entire life behind me. By the time I reached the street, the lights from the house were still on, the music playing softly from inside. Most of the guests had probably left by now, but I could still hear the murmur of voices. I walked up to the door and paused for a moment, my hand on the handle. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe that she'd be gone, that she'd packed up and left, knowing what was coming. But I knew better. Emma never ran from confrontation. She thrived on it. She'd be waiting, probably with another round of excuses or worse. She'd be sitting there calm, collected, acting like none of this had fazed her. That thought alone sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I pushed it down. I opened the door, and there she was, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "You came back," she said, her tone flat, like she'd expected me to leave, maybe even hoped for it. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for something. An apology, a tear, some sign that she regretted any of this. But there was nothing. Just that cold, indifferent look she'd been giving me all night. "You're still here," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Hollow." She sighed and finally looked up, locking eyes with me. "Where else would I go? It's late, and I'm not going to run off just because you're having a meltdown." That was it. That was all she had to say. No apology. No remorse. Just that. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to shout, to throw everything back in her face. But I didn't. I was too tired for that. Too worn out by the whole thing to give her the reaction she was baiting me for. "We're done, Emma," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm not doing this anymore. You don't get to sit there and act like I'm the one who's overreacting. You lied. You cheated. And now you want to pretend it's not a big deal? I'm done." She blinked, finally showing a flicker of emotion. Surprise, maybe, or anger. Couldn't tell. "What are you talking about? You're just going to walk away from this? From us? There is no us anymore." I shot back, shaking my head. "Whatever we had, it's gone. You made sure of that. So yeah, I'm walking away." She stared at me for a moment, and for the first time that night, I saw something real in her expression. Fear. She knew I meant it. For the first time all night, her facade cracked. I saw it, the flicker of panic in her eyes. She stood up from the couch, her phone slipping out of her hand, landing softly on the carpet. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out at first. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to regain control, how to spin this back into her favor. Emma wasn't used to losing. Not like this. "You're being ridiculous," she finally said, her voice shaking just a little. "You're seriously going to throw away everything we've built over one stupid misunderstanding? I told you it didn't mean anything with Mike. Why can't you just—" "Stop," I interrupted, raising my hand. "Stop trying to make this about what I can or can't handle. This isn't a misunderstanding. You didn't just slip up. You've been lying to me, disrespecting me for months, and I let it slide because I thought—" I stopped, choking back the bitterness rising in my throat. "I thought you were still the person I married." Her face twisted, half hurt, half defiant. "I am still that person. You're just so wrapped up in your own world that you don't see it." That was her move, always twisting it back on me. Every single time. Like somehow this was all my fault, that I had driven her into Mike's arms. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Don't try to pull that on me, I said, stepping closer. You had a choice, Emma, and you chose him. You chose to disrespect our marriage, our trust. And now you want me to act like it's just some mistake? I'm not buying it. She looked at me, desperation creeping into her voice now. I didn't choose him, okay? You've been so distant lately, and I didn't know what else to do. It's not like I planned any of this. Mike was just, he was there and you weren't. I needed someone, and you went to him. I finished for her, my voice tight. Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you made a choice. You chose Mike. For a moment, the weight of my words hung between us. Her eyes flicked away, and I knew she didn't have a defense. This was it. This was her final act, and the curtain had just dropped. But Emma wasn't one to back down, not even when she was cornered. You think you're so righteous, she shot back, her voice growing harder. You think just because you say we're done that it's over? What about you, huh? You haven't been perfect either. You've been so checked out, so obsessed with your work, your life, that you barely even noticed me. So yeah, I got close to Mike. Maybe too close, but at least he made me feel like I mattered. Her words stung, but not in the way she intended. It was the same song, just a different verse. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry for being caught. The whole time, she was trying to claw her way back into the narrative, to make this mess of hers seem justified. You really think that excuses what you did? I said, shaking my head. You think blaming me makes it okay? I don't know, she shouted, her voice breaking now. I don't know what else to say. I'm trying to explain to you, but you won't listen. You're just walking away. She stepped closer to me, and for a split second, I thought I saw something real in her eyes. Something raw. Like maybe, just maybe, she was realizing what she had done. But it was too late. There was no turning back now. She couldn't talk her way out of this one, and deep down I think she knew it. I am walking away, I said quietly, because this isn't about a mistake. It's about who you've become. You've turned into someone I don't even recognize. She recoiled like I'd slapped her. I could see the fear growing in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to back down this time, that I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation like she always did. You're seriously just going to give up on us? She asked, her voice trembling. After everything we've been through? I'm not giving up, I said, my tone soft but firm. I'm letting go. There's a difference. The room felt unbearably heavy, the air thick with all the things we hadn't said, the lies she'd spun to keep me trapped in this cycle. For so long, I'd wanted to believe that she was still the woman I fell in love with, that we could somehow go back to what we were. But that woman was gone. And this Emma, the one standing in front of me now, she was someone else entirely. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The fight had drained out of her, and for the first time, she looked uncertain, like she didn't know how to play this next hand. We don't, I replied, the weight of those words settling in. You'll get your things, I'll get mine, and we'll go our separate ways. I'm done pretending this can be fixed. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face again. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. She stood there, staring at me like I just shattered her world. Maybe I had. But the truth was, she'd shattered mine first, long before tonight. Emma didn't say anything for a while. She just stood there, biting her lip, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. I thought she might cry, might break down and beg me to stay. But she didn't. She just looked away, her shoulders slumping, the fight draining out of her completely. Fine, she whispered, her voice hollow. If that's what you want. I nodded, even though it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. It's what I need. For a long time, we just stood there in the living room, the silence between us more telling than anything we could have said. It was over, and we both knew it. There was no going back. Without another word, I turned and headed for the door. I didn't look back. Couldn't. If I did, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to leave. But as I stepped out into the cold night, one thing became crystal clear. I had to let her go. And this time, For good.s I stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a wall, biting through my clothes and waking me up to the reality of what just happened. I was leaving my wife, my home, my entire life as I knew it. The weight of that decision pressed down on me, but underneath it all was a strange sense of relief, like I could finally breathe after months of suffocating under her lies. My feet moved automatically, but I had no idea where I was going. The neighborhood was quiet now, the party long over, with just the faint sound of a car in the distance and the hum of streetlights buzzing overhead. I glanced back at the house once, just once, seeing the dim lights still glowing from the windows. Emma was in there, probably sitting on the couch in shock, realizing I wasn't coming back. A part of me expected her to run after me, to come storming out and throw one last attempt at making me stay. But she didn't. I think she knew it was useless now, that no amount of pleading or sweet-talking could fix what she'd broken. I reached the end of the street and stopped, staring blankly at the intersection ahead. Where the hell was I supposed to go from here? I couldn't just keep walking aimlessly through the night, but going back to that house was out of the question. The thought of sleeping in the same bed where she'd laid, while thinking about Mike, made my skin crawl. I needed distance. I pulled out my phone, staring at the blank screen. No messages. No missed calls. She'd given up, too. Part of me was glad, but another part, deep down, still stung at the idea that she wasn't fighting for me. For us, that she'd let me walk out that door without a real attempt to stop me. I opened my contacts, scrolling through the list. I didn't want to bother anyone at this hour, but I needed to talk to someone. Someone who could help me make sense of all the chaos in my head. My thumb hovered over my brother's name, but I stopped. He'd been suspicious of Emma for months, always dropping little comments about her weird vibes, or how he didn't trust how close she'd gotten with Mike, and I'd brushed him off every time, defending her, defending our marriage, saying he didn't understand. I wasn't ready to admit to him that he'd been right. Instead, I scrolled down and found Greg's name, my oldest friend, the guy who'd been there since high school and never once judged me, no matter how bad things got. If anyone could help me through this, it'd be him. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy and confused. Dude, it's like 2 a.m. What's going on? I didn't even know how to start. Hey, Greg. I need somewhere to crash tonight. I can't stay at my place. There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he woke up, piecing together the seriousness in my voice. What happened? You and Emma get into it? Yeah, I said, my voice barely holding steady. It's bad, man. Really bad. I'll explain everything when I get there. But I can't be there right now. Jesus, Greg muttered. Okay, come over. I'll make up the couch. You want me to pick you up or something? Nah, I'll walk. I need the air, I said, grateful but still feeling like I was floating outside my body, watching myself go through the motions. Thanks, man. No problem, he replied, the concern evident in his voice now. Just get here safe. I hung up, shoving my phone back into my pocket, and started walking again. Greg's place wasn't far, just a few streets over. But the walk felt like it took forever, each step heavy with the weight of everything I was leaving behind. As I made my way through the quiet streets, my mind replayed the night in vivid detail. Her eyes, cold and distant. Mike's smug face as he stood next to her, like I was the one intruding. The way she defended herself, shifting the blame onto me, trying to make it seem like I'd driven her into his arms. But worst of all was her indifference. She hadn't fought for me, hadn't begged for forgiveness. She'd let me go without a fight. I hated how that still hurt. Even after everything, I wanted her to fight for us, to show me she cared. But she didn't. Maybe she never had. Maybe all those nights she spent at Mike's, all those innocent text messages I pretended not to notice, were just the start of something I'd been too blind to see. Maybe she had checked out long before I did. I reached Greg's house, the porch light casting a warm glow over the driveway. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, grounding myself before I knocked. Greg opened the door a few seconds later, his face half hidden in the dim light, but I could see the concern etched in his expression. Come in, man, he said, stepping aside to let me through. You look like hell. Feels like it? I muttered, dropping my jacket onto the floor as I stepped inside. The warmth of his house hit me, the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. A small kindness he'd probably prepared the second I'd called. He didn't press me for details right away, just handed me a mug and sat across from me on the couch. "You want to talk about it?" he asked gently, knowing I'd get to it when I was ready. I stared into the coffee, watching the steam curl up into the air. For a long time, I didn't say anything. But then the words came spilling out. I told him everything. About the party, about Mike, about the sick Halloween prank that had turned my life upside down. I told him about Emma's excuses, her lies, the way she tried to make it all about me, about how distant I'd supposedly been. By the time I finished, my throat was raw, my hands gripping the mug so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Greg didn't say much as I talked, just nodded, letting me get it all out. When I was done, he sighed, leaning back into the couch. "That's messed up, man," he said, shaking his head. "I knew something was off with her, but I didn't think it was this bad." "You really think it's over?" I nodded, the finality of it settling into my chest like a lead weight. "It's over. It has to be. I can't stay in a marriage where I'm not respected, where she's doing whatever she's doing with Mike." Greg didn't argue with me. He just nodded again, his expression serious. "You did the right thing by leaving. You don't deserve that." "I know," I said quietly, "but it doesn't make it hurt any less." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the situation pressing down on us both. The end of a marriage is never easy, no matter how justified it is. And even though I knew this was the right move, it still felt like I was mourning something. Mourning the life I thought I had, the person I thought she was. "I'll be here as long as you need," Greg said after a while, giving me a reassuring nod. "We'll get through this, man." I managed a small smile, grateful for his support. But deep down, I knew that getting through this would be a lot harder than just walking out that door.